There is a wall that stopped a truck, not slowed it, not cracked under it, stopped it. The wall is two panels of rigid foam with a core of reinforced concrete poured continuously between them. It weighs roughly 10 times what a wood frame wall weighs. No gaps, no seams, no cavity for wind pressure to exploit. In an EF5 tornado, debris travels faster than 200 miles per hour. Lumber becomes a spear, a car becomes a missile. In Moore, Oklahoma, in 2013, one of the most powerful tornadoes ever recorded on American soil launched a full-size pickup truck into one of these walls. The wall did not fail. Everything on either side was a bare concrete slab. The neighbors' houses were gone, and the wall stood. That wall is legal in every state in this country. You can build one right now. The Model Residential Building Code that governs how most American homes are constructed still sets wind load design floors that an EF3 tornado, not an EF5, an EF3, the weakest tornado that kills people at scale, exceeds the moment it touches down. The wall that stopped the truck is legal everywhere. The code that makes it optional is national policy. If that contradiction interests you, subscribe. This channel exists to follow it wherever it leads. The first thing most people assume when they hear this is that there must be a catch. The material is probably banned in residential construction, or it is some experimental technology that has not been fully tested, or it costs 3 times what a normal house costs and only a handful of wealthy people can access it. None of those things are true. ICF, insulated concrete forms, is approved by the International Code Council and permitted in all 50 states. Commercial builders, school districts, and government facilities have used it for decades. FEMA's own Safe Room Guidance, P361, recognizes ICF as a viable construction method for above-ground safe rooms. The federal agency that responds to tornado disasters has already told you what survives them. It has been in the documentation for years. The cost premium is real. ICF typically runs 5 to 15% above conventional wood frame on total build cost. That premium narrows over time. ICF walls reduce energy costs meaningfully, and insurance differentials on a more resilient structure can close the gap further. It is not free, but it is not experimental, and it is not banned, which means the question is not why this material doesn't exist. It exists, it works, it is legal. The question is why the average American home in Oklahoma, in Mississippi, in Alabama, in every state where tornadoes kill people, still goes up in wood. And the answer to that question runs straight through the history of how building codes in America actually get written. The technology itself did not start in America. ICF was developed in Europe in the 1960s and refined through the 1970s in Canada, where builders were solving a different problem, extreme cold, and the need for a wall that performed as both structure and insulation without a thermal break. The Canadian construction community adopted the concrete core not as a side benefit, but as the point. The foam was the form, the concrete was the wall. The system reached the United States through the 1980s and 1990s, entering first through commercial and institutional construction. The buildings where performance standards were higher and the approval process was more flexible: hotels, schools, government buildings, structures where failure carried liability. The residential sector was a different story. Residential construction in America is governed by the International Residential Code, the IRC, and by the time ICF arrived in force, the IRC's default pathway was already built around dimensional lumber. Not because lumber was the only option, because lumber had the infrastructure, the supply chains, the trained labor force, the familiar code language, and the industry groups, with the resources to staff the rooms where codes get written. Here is where it gets strange. An ICF wall works the way it works because of what it is at the molecular level. The foam forms arrive on a job site, and they look genuinely like oversized building blocks, interlocking panels that stack without mortar. A crew braces them, runs rebar through the cavities and pours concrete. What sets is not a framed wall with insulation stuffed between the studs. It is a monolithic unit, continuous concrete, continuous foam, no fasteners penetrating the thermal plane, no gap between the stud and the sheathing where wind pressure can wedge in and begin to peel. In a tornado, two things kill people inside wood frame homes. The first is wall penetration, debris moving at projectile velocity punches through the sheathing and the drywall. The second is the wall-to-roof connection failing, which causes the roof to lift and the walls to follow. ICF addresses the first failure mode almost completely. The wall does not come apart because it is not assembled in pieces. And here is the part nobody mentions. In Moore, the ICF walls held. The roofs did not, because most ICF homes, including the ones in Moore, are still topped with conventional wood frame roof assemblies. Trusses, sheathing, asphalt shingles. The same roof every wood frame house has. An ICF wall is not a tornado-proof house. It is a tornado-resistant wall. The distinction matters. A complete solution, the one that actually keeps the family inside alive, requires ICF walls paired with a reinforced roof system, a concrete bond beam at the top of the wall, hurricane straps engineered for the actual regional wind hazard, or a fully designed roof diaphragm that can resist uplift at the loads this region actually produces. The wall won. The ceiling is still the weak point. Anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something. That concession is important, and it is also the action item. Hold that thought. So why isn't everyone building this way? The International Residential Code is not written by a federal agency. It is not produced by engineers employed by the government. The IRC is developed through a process administered by the International Council, and that process includes voting participation by industry stakeholders, trade groups, manufacturers, associations with documented financial interests in the outcome of the code. Among the most active of those groups is the American Wood Council, which represents lumber producers and engineered wood manufacturers. The AWC maintains a substantial code advocacy operation. It participates in the code development cycle. It has a clear and structural interest in a residential building code whose default pathway requires wood. This is not a secret. It is not a conspiracy. It is how the process works. And the AWC would not describe it as anything other than legitimate industry participation. The question is not whether wood companies advocate for wood. Of course they do. The question is what it costs the family in Moore, Oklahoma, whose house was built to the IRC floor, in a region where the IRC floor is below the threshold of the storm that actually came. IRC Section R301 maps the country into wind speed design zones. In much of Tornado Alley, the residential design floor sits at or below 115 miles per hour. An EF3 tornado, not the worst, not the rarest, the one that comes through regularly and levels subdivisions, begins at 136 miles per hour. An EF4 begins at 166. An EF5 exceeds 200. The code sets the floor. The tornado does not check the code. A house built to fail in 20 years is a house that gets rebuilt in wood. A house that stands for 100 years buys one roof's worth of lumber. The system is not broken. It is working exactly as designed, just not for you. If this channel's work matters to you, subscribe. Every person who stays with us makes this harder to ignore. The camera holds on a single roof line, still standing in a field of debris. There are no neighboring walls visible, only bare slabs where the houses used to be. The debris line runs up to one exterior wall and stops. On the surface of the foam facing, there is a compression dent, a deep one, the shape of something large that hit it very fast. The foam deformed. Behind it, the concrete is unmarked. The truck hit the wall. The wall is still there. Post-storm engineering surveys documented what happened at sites like this across Moore, and the pattern is consistent. ICF walls remain structurally intact at wind loads that removed wood frame homes from their foundations entirely. The wall didn't flex, the neighborhood did. And then the family tried to get a mortgage on the next one. Because here is what survival does not fix. In tornado corridors across the American interior, ICF homes face a financing wall that the EF5 did not knock down. Appraisers work from comparable sales. Other homes that have sold recently in the same market. In most of Tornado Alley, there are almost no ICF comparables. A lender who cannot find comparable sales cannot value the property. And a property that cannot be valued cannot be financed through a conventional loan. Insurance discounts for demonstrated structural resilience are inconsistent. Some carriers offer them. Many do not have a rating category for it. The wall survived the tornado. The appraisal didn't. This is the chain. Wood is the default. The default is protected in the code. The code shapes what builders build. Builders build what banks will finance. Banks finance what appraisers can value. Appraisers value what exists in comparable sales. And because almost nothing was built in ICF, there are almost no comparables, which means almost nothing gets financed in ICF, which means almost nothing gets built. The cycle does not require a conspiracy. It only requires inertia, and the occasional industry group making sure that inertia has a very well-staffed lobby. Here is what you can actually do. ICF is permitted everywhere. Start with a builder who has completed at least 3 ICF residential projects. Not a builder who has heard of it, a builder who has poured it. Ask your county planning office for the actual historical wind hazard record for your parcel, not the IRC zone map, the historical record of what has actually happened at that latitude. Call your insurer and ask directly whether ICF construction qualifies for a structural resilience discount. Write down the answer, the date, and the name of the person who gave it. And if you are building new in a tornado risk region, pair ICF walls with an engineered roof system. That is not a hedge. That is the complete solution. Type truck in the comments below. I will send you the ICF Builder Qualification Checklist and the FEMA P361 Safe Room reference document, both free, both direct. The wall in Moore is still standing. The neighborhood around it was rebuilt in wood, to the same code floor, in the same wind zone, waiting for the same storm. The families who rebuilt did not choose to be exposed. They were handed a code floor drawn below the hazard they actually face, by a process shaped by people who profit from the material the code defaults to. That is not a theory. It is the documented structure of how residential construction standards get made in the United States. If you've made it this far, you already know this channel is not going to stop pulling on this thread. Subscribe and stay with us for what comes next. They didn't build it wrong. They built it cheap. There's a difference, and now you know which one you're paying for.